Hi everybody, it's Cray. I teach watercolor and today we are doing our Tree of Life project. This is inspired and derivative of Tree of Life by Gustav Klimt, who is our artist that we're focusing on today. We will be doing this project in 6 steps. So our very first step is we are going to paint the background. Our second step is we are going to paint our tree. Our third step is we're going to put in different values in our tree, so it's possible that you can combine step 2 and 3. Our fourth step is we're going to put in our ground. Our fifth step is we're going to start putting in our symbols here, like the bird and all the different things going on. And then very last step is details, okay? We have Michael here working the cameras for us.
Well, hello.
And Keenan is on vacation. He's with his family. We're so happy for him. We're so grateful that Michael has subbed for us.
Yes.
We're married in real life. And he's filmed with us before, so he might be a familiar voice to you or he might not. But we're grateful.
It's been a while. It's for you OGs.
For the OGs. I think it's probably been about 2 years or something crazy. Okay. We are using 6 colors in this project. So our very first color is honey brown. Our second color is lemon yellow. Our third color is fuchsia. Our fourth color is violet. And our last color is Tahoe blue. These are our in-house paints. They are a liquid dye-based watercolor, which means they're very vibrant. That also means that they will fade in direct sunlight, which sounds really scary, but it's okay. A lot of this is for learning and for fun, and as long as you don't put it in direct sunlight, your colors should last. If, we're using 4 paintbrushes. Round 2, round 6, round 12, 1-inch wash. We named this one, this is Tobe.
Tobe.
But you can name them whatever you want. You don't even have to name them. I'm using Let's Make Art watercolor paper, which is a, I had the word, you know when you have a word at the tip of your tongue and then at the last second it changes?
Cold press.
Nope,
Cotton.
But it starts with a C.
God.
It's not cellulose. It is a cellulose paper.
Wait, it is or it isn't?
It is.
Okay.
I think. It's not 100% cotton paper. That's what you gotta know. But I think it works well with liquid watercolors and I like it. And I have my Holbein soft tape. I taped my outline down. We're gonna transfer our outline and then we're gonna do our oath and we'll move into painting. So after you tape your paper down, which I highly suggest taping your paper down, and what that will do is 1, create a clean edge, and 2, your paper, no matter what type of watercolor paper you use, it will warp when you paint on it, which means it starts to like bend and all of that stuff. So if you just tape it down, then it stays put, which is nice. Okay, you're gonna take your graphite paper and you're gonna put it dark, shiny side down. And then you're just gonna draw directly on your outline. And whatever mark you make will transfer to your image. And I always like to do a test one and see if I need to press harder or go lighter or anything like that. If this is one of your first boxes, I need you to know that tracing paper is reusable and it gets much better with time. So if you have a couple of these boxes, the best thing that you can do is just stick to one piece of the paper.
What specifically gets better over time?
The graphite is softer. So when you first use graphite paper, it's really strong, so it can make dark marks really easy. And sometimes you even get dark marks on areas that you're just like pressing your hand on. But as you use it more, that rubs off more and more, which means you have more control over what's actually transferred. Sometimes what I'll do, even with a brand new piece of graphite paper, is put it on a blank piece of paper dark side down and just rub it like crazy to get rid of all of the excess graphite. So then it's not as sensitive when I go to use it. You can also, there's many ways that you can transfer images. A lot of people prefer light boxes. I think we sell those for like 20 bucks. And that is just like a little light pad that you can use to transfer. You can also just use a window. That works too.
My hot tip for tracings like this, which get complicated, is to use a colored pencil.
Yes.
You can see where you've traced.
Yes. And you're going to notice as you're doing this that my swirls don't connect. So like if you look at this, here's the bottom of the swirl and here's the top of the swirl, but the bottom of the swirl, I didn't complete it. I did that on purpose, and that is because I'm going to show you how to do those swirl marks with your brush, and I want those to happen naturally instead of trying to just fill in a space. So that's why your swirls are sometimes one line or just incomplete. That was on purpose. But you can still, I'm still like tracing it so I know where to put it.
Some people might be looking at your white paper and seeing how dark your lines are. I feel like you do yours a little darker so that they show up on camera. Is that something that you do?
Yes, so when you're transferring an image on your own, you have to remember that watercolor is transparent, which means that all of the pencil marks show up through it. And once you get like graphite area or a pencil area wet, even with just water, you can't erase it. So when you're at home, try and get your marks as light as possible, so then they won't really stick out through the painting. So dark enough that you can see, but light enough that it doesn't look like a black line.
Tracing.
Yeah. But also I want to say that as an artist and as a teacher and someone who sells their art and makes prints of their art and all of this stuff, I do not get upset at pencil lines. If anything, I think it adds to the originality, the authenticity, the experience of the painting itself. It just isn't a great thing when it kind of detracts from the painting. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, and that level, whatever level that is different for everybody. Like for me, I'm fine with people seeing like pencil marks, even some of them dark. For you, you might be like, no, I think that detracts from my painting, so I don't like that, so I'm gonna go lighter. So this is where it's kind of up to you. Okay. Now there are a lot of lines in this, a lot of swirls. So just do the best you can. I will say that the one drawback that I find when using graphite paper is once you untape your outline, you can't line it back up. Like it's almost impossible. So if you miss an area, you just have to like eyeball it in.
In the last video, Rembrandt, I asked if you had seen a Rembrandt in real life, and you said you had. Mm-hmm. I know we've seen a Klimt in real life. I think I've seen it with you.
Where? Got to do some research.
I don't remember.
We've been to a lot. We
go to museums.
We like museums, so I've been to quite a few, but I wouldn't be surprised.
I feel like it was in France.
I feel like the museum we went to in France was like
the Monet.
Strictly Monet. La Orangerie, I think.
I'm very bad.
I'm not good at French, but that's me trying. Okay, so I just kind of am lifting. I'm noticing some areas that I did not draw. This is where your colored pencil would come into really effective play. But just remember, you always have the option to eyeball it. It's not a big deal. Also, as you can see, my outline ended before my paper edge. So you can either, well, what I'm gonna do, just to show you how to do it, is just add another line of tape to meet that edge, or you can just keep the line going and paint to the top of the paper. All right. Did we do our oath?
No.
If you can raise your right hand and repeat after me. I promise to be kind to myself.
I promise to be kind to myself.
I promise not to compare my
I
work.
promise not to compare my work.
And I promise to have fun.
And I promise to have fun.
Thank you. Okay, now before we get started, I want you to practice doing these swirly shapes on a scratch piece of paper using your round 12 or your round 6. So I have a little scratch paper here. You can grab any color you want. You can see all my colors kind of mixed together. I didn't do a good job of separating them. That's okay, I'll just do more. Pick up some color, and I want you to practice making swirls. And try and make them even. So what I noticed is that if I try and lay my hand down and do a swirl, I'm going to get a lot of thin and thick lines. You see how there's a bunch of differences? Where if I put my brush more upright and paint it on the tip and went a little bit slower, I got a more even thickness.
I think you're missing the most important step.
What?
You gotta go swoosh as you do it.
Okay, let's try it.
The noises help. Oh, look how good that one is.
Well, that one is pretty good.
Yep, it's the noise.
But I have to say, and I want to call this out, this takes practice. It took me probably about 10 minutes of doing this and playing with how to hold my hand, how hard to press down. Let's try it pressing hard just to see. So this is me pressing really hard. So you see how thick my line is, and I don't feel like I can get a curve very easy.
That's a pressing issue.
Oh, that was good. Okay, and then now let's try with my hand more towards the top of the brush and more light pressure. That is where I feel like I have the most control. Okay, so try all the different ways. Maybe it's called like choke up on your brush, like maybe hold it really on the ferrule, and just kind of see how that feels. I feel pretty good about that too. Do whatever works for you. Some people are really uptight about how to hold a brush, and I'm just like, why? Hold it how you want to hold it. Everyone holds things differently. Okay, but practice this now. It will make it so much easier when you go into your painting, because then you can like do those swirls. And the other nice thing that I actually kind of really like about this is it forces you to be okay with whatever happens. So if I have, you know, like a little bit of a rough line right here that I got on this, I actually really like that. I'm not gonna go in and fill that in. It just gives you opportunity to practice embracing what happens and also letting your artistic self be seen. Okay, now let's get to painting. So I'm going to use my 1-inch wash because I'm going to try and do a light background. And I'm not going to use just straight lemon yellow because that's a very, very vibrant color, and I want to tone it down to give it warmth, but not like highlighter. So I'm going to have some lemon yellow, and I'm going to grab some honey brown, and I'm going to grab a little bit of fuchsia. And that's going to create more like an orangey color. And then I'm going to add water to it. There we go. And then I'm just going to take that and using my 1-inch wash, paint the entire area, including the tree trunk, but I am going to leave this curved line alone. So we can do this. And this is why I like my 1-inch wash, because I can do this whole area fairly quickly. And I want it to be pretty smooth. So that means I'm just gonna work fast. You can use water to kind of spread out the color that's already there before you pick more up. You can also do your brush strokes in a bunch of different directions. That will help with the evenness, because sometimes if we just do horizontal lines, we'll get some like edges between where those brush strokes meet. So sometimes you can go at an angle and then maybe go up and down and do the other angle, and that's just gonna kind of even out all of your brush stroke marks.
Have you ever like filled up a tray with water, put some paint in it to get a color, and like dipped paper into it?
Absolutely.
Does that work?
Mm-hmm. So I don't do that to get even washes, but you know how on like those ombre like washes on really pretty like wedding invitations, it looks dipped. So I've done that a couple of times. So basically you get all the paint in your tray and you dip one side of the paper, and the water works its way up into the paper, and the longer you hold it in different sections, it's like dyeing an Easter egg.
Cool.
But I haven't used that to get an even wash. But I have used that to make it look dip dyed. It's pretty fun, actually. You can get some super, sometimes I'll just like, if I have leftover paint, I'm gonna dry this while I talk. While I have leftover paint, or like let's say this pretty gold color, but I gotta rinse my palette, I'll just add water to it and then take some paper, like really pretty cottony paper, and just like drop it in there and let it dry. And just like whatever colors transfer, whatever edges. And a lot of that I have illustrated a few books. And so those papers, I'll scan them, and that will be the background for when I'm doing like text for quotes and things like that.
Cool.
Just to get some really cool washes that kind of gives you that watercolor feel without like a full painting.
That is just the cutest little blow dryer I have ever seen.
Well, it's not a blow dryer. They get really mad at me when I call it a blow dryer. It's a craft tool. It's different. Basically, it's not a push of air. It's like a heat gun.
It's like a whiff.
It's a
whiff.
A whiff of air. You can use a blow dryer, but just know that blow dryers are strong in their
like
movement.
If your paper's too wet, it'll like splatter.
It will move the water, which actually is sometimes a really cool effect. So like, don't discount that. But if you want the paint to stay where it is, that's where like a heat gun tool or a craft heat tool come into play.
Save some money and just go onto your paper.
I've done that before.
Have you?
Yes. It's because I really only started using like a heat gun like a year or two ago. Before then, I just like let it dry. I would go do something else. Oof. And when I was like bored, I'd be like, okay, let me put my reference photo down here so you guys can see it. All right, now we're gonna move on to step 2, if your painting is dry. And I'm gonna start putting in my tree. So I have my gold background, and now I want my tree to be a really pretty goldish brown. So I'm gonna use that same color mixture, but a little bit darker. So I have honey brown, fuchsia, lemon yellow, maybe like add a little bit of purple in there if you want it to be like a reddish dark brown.
Listen, if you're a risk taker, add that purple in.
If you want to be edgy like me, go ahead and drop in that purple. Okay.
Sarah's other painting channel, The Edgy Painter.
Living life on the edge, one drop of color at a time.
Wow, write that
A
down.
whole thing.
That's good.
It's coming soon. Okay, so I'm going to take my 12, and I'm basically just going to follow my outline. Like on the trunk, we're just going to go ahead and paint that in. And then when you get to the branches is really where you're going to put into play your swirly practice, okay?
Your swirl expertise.
And I'm just using my outline as a guide, not like a general guide. Not like, oh, my swirl is off from the tracing. That's okay. Doesn't matter.
It's not a coloring book page. It's just a guide.
It's just a guide. Now, when I mentioned the steps where I said we're going to do our tree and then we're going to drop in different values, what I mean by that is you see how on this tree there are some like darker areas and lighter areas? You see that?
Yep.
Like here, here. You can do that while it's wet. So you have 2 options. You can paint your tree and then go back in and do another layer. Or when it's wet like this, you can go along, like let's say an edge, and just drop in some color and let that move and do its own thing. So I just want to point out, if you're like, well, what's the difference? Can you get the close-up on this one?
It'll cost you extra.
Okay. You can see that this is where I went in and darkened it because that brushstroke stayed sharp. You see that?
Yes.
This, on this side, is where I dropped it in while it's wet because that color bled out. So if you like the look of a sharp line like this, go ahead and do it when it's dry. When you want it to kind of blend in, go ahead and do it when it's wet. I will say that when you do it when it's wet, you relinquish some control, and that's not a bad thing, just so you know. And there could be times where like my swirl just ran into my tree branch. Don't beat yourself up about that. Just keep going. And we're just gonna do our entire tree.
Words of Dory, just keep swimming.
Just keep swimming. And you can start from the inside out or outside in. Try both. See if there's one that works better for you. Now let's talk about Klimt a little. So he is an Austrian painter. He's from Austria. He was around, born in the late 1800s, like mid to late, and then died around like 1920. 1918 is when he died. His dad was a gold engraver. And which I found interesting because I was trying to understand why he used gold leaf in his work. And I think maybe that has something to do with it, but a lot of people don't really know. His style is reminiscent of kind of more Art Nouveau. So Art Nouveau has a lot of different names from different places. And essentially what it was is it was just trying to modernize art at that time. And they used a lot of inspiration from organic shapes. And if you remember our Matisse lesson, I was so excited because they said they use sinuous shapes. And I was just like, I know what that means because I already looked that up. So a lot of curved lines, a lot of curved work. And one of the characteristics of Art Nouveau movement not only are sinuous shapes, but it's called a whiplash line. And so if you think back to like, it's in architecture, it's in art, it's in decor. Think about, you know how it's like this viney line? Like think of that like wrought iron fence look where it's like, kind of looks like a vine. Mm-hmm. That's a whiplash line. So if you see paintings that are kind of more ornate, that have that kind of curved line, you can see in our tree branches here, we got a very curved line. You're most likely looking at an Art Nouveau piece. Huh. Now he started a movement in Austria that was called, let me look at my notes.
The Klimt movement.
The Vienna Succession. And that was similar to Art Nouveau, and their whole premise, what they were trying to do was basically just create room for artists that weren't traditional, that were kind of unconventional, and allow them to exhibit their work. They were really embracing not going after what everyone was creating at that time. They really wanted to celebrate the different styles, the unconventional, and let art be for art. He eventually left that movement, but that was kind of, he was a founding member of that.
He just get bored of it, or what? What happened?
I couldn't really find out why. It just said that he was no longer a part of it. Huh. Okay.
Your tree's looking fabulous.
Thank you. Just keep going. Keep swirling.
Real curly.
Now, it was actually really interesting. I went to the library to find books for these artists that I was going to do research on that I could share. And I looked, there were a couple of Gustav Klimt's work, and something just to give you guys a heads up. He loved painting the female form and kind of went towards erotic art a little bit. So if you look through all of his work and his paintings, please do not be surprised or offended if you see that. But it was interesting because I was trying to find this painting in one of his books, and I couldn't find it. I mean, if you're not familiar, he's also done, his more famous paintings are The Kiss. There is, and I wish I had a picture of that right now. Chris, I'm going to send you a picture of The Kiss that you can put right here. He also did a portrait that's really famous, and it's kind of in this very similar gold style with the marks and the symbolism. But I couldn't find this one, and I was really starting to get irritated. Even though this is probably one of his most famous like landscape paintings. And it's because this painting was actually a sketch for a mosaic that was part of a installation, a 3-panel mosaic that's in Austria. So this is actually the center panel, and then there's more to it. I think there's a woman on one side and like a couple on the other. So I was just like, oh, maybe that's why I couldn't find it in any of the books that I was looking at.
The portrait of the woman that he's famous for, is it Adele Bloch-Bauer?
Does she have dark hair?
Yes.
Yeah.
He's also got a really cool skeleton painting with blues.
He does. Okay, so that leads to some of his most famous works were created during, they're calling it his golden phase. And that's when he actually used gold leaf in his paintings. And the interesting thing about gold leaf is that you have to apply it very carefully. It's expensive, but it also is flat because it's gold. So he was kind of into how this flat thing can work with three-dimensional painting and drawings and renderings, and how these things play next to each other, which I thought was really interesting. And this painting, The Tree of Life, is the only landscape he did during his golden phase, which is why it's one of his more popular ones.
Do you think that landscapes in general aren't as prolific because there wasn't really people paying for them? Like, portraits were around because people would pay an artist to make their portrait. Like, there's money behind it. And then, like, there's a lot of Catholic church art because the church had a ton of money and they paid for that kind of stuff. But landscapes were just, you just did them to do them.
Well, actually, during different art movements and during different times and in different places, there were different popular things that people wanted to buy and people were willing to pay artists for. So actually, landscape paintings in, I mean, I can't think of the time period, but if you go to museums, a lot of it is actually landscape paintings. And that's because at the time, societally, that is what people wanted to buy and pay for. And so it really just depends on what country you're at and the art movement that you were in, if there were a lot of landscape paintings at the time. But some art movements were born out of pushing away from landscape, or going towards portraiture, or pushing away from portraiture. I mean, if there's anything I've learned in art history, is one action leads to another action. I mean, Art Nouveau led to Art Deco, which led to modernism. I guess what I'm trying to say is change is inevitable, and one trying to solve a problem inevitably creates a new problem, always. And that's what art movements are, where it's just like, this is what's happening in the country, in the world, societally, this is what's popular. And then somebody says, I'm tired of that. I don't want to paint that anymore. I want to paint this. Or I want to try approaching it this way. Or maybe there's a new way to look at something. And I think it's just because as humans, we're always kind of pushing for something new. And it was just really interesting reading through this led to this. A lot of it, like, we're also talking about pop art this month. And pop art was a direct, I don't want to say like, result of people being tired of abstract expressionism, which was the popular movement at that time. So it's just kind of really interesting to look at what is happening and know that that inevitably leads to something new over and over and over again. So this painting itself The tree of life is a pretty common like subject matter, right? It has a lot of religious connotations. And from what I understand, it's kind of about how all things are connected. And what's interesting about this painting is the tree is reaching towards the heavens, but it's also grounded in earth, right? So it's kind of like this reminder that things grow and things reach and we keep going, but at the same time we have to stay grounded. And these swirling tree branches are calling back to the perpetuity of life and how complicated it is too, where it keeps going, but then another one goes and another one goes, and it's complex. So that's what he's trying to communicate here in this tree with these swirling branches, which are pretty unique. I feel like I don't see this a lot in art, and he's talking about the complexities of life that we experience.
I think there's something to this art stuff.
I mean, I'm a fan.
When you were sitting through all your art history classes, you probably were like, why more art history classes? But now, look at you now.
I still have to go to the library and like remind myself, but it's actually like these phrases, like when we talk about in the Rembrandt, chiaroscuro, I know that one. When we took a tour, recently we went to Italy and we took a tour of the Vatican and our...
Holy cow, by the way.
Oh yeah, seriously. But our tour guy was talking about trompe-l'oeil. Leo? I can't pronounce it right, but it's a phrase to mean trick the eye. And I was just like, I know that, I remember that. And so like contrapposto, like all of these things are just these like memories that I remember. I remember learning about that in school.
Contrapposto with marinara, a little bit of parmesan. That's what I remember of Italy.
Contrapposto is the stance of statues or sculptures, because before they would just like, think of Egyptian statues, they were just like straight, and then think of Roman or Italian, or you know, where their hip is bent and one leg is that, which was huge. It gave the idea of movement. So it was this huge change in how sculptures were done, because before it was just very flat, like, you know, Barbie doll kind of thing. And then all of a sudden they had this movement and angle to them, just with a little hip out and a bent knee.
Listen, you gotta add some sass.
Yeah.
Add some sass to it, and that's it.
And that stance is called contrapposto.
Contrapposto. Shout out to the library.
The library is so cool. Seriously.
Also, shout out to my other bestie, Italy.
Okay, here I'm just kind of checking I think I forgot to outline an area, so I'm just eyeballing it. And we have a black thing here, and it was so funny because somebody I work with, they're like, I'm not trying to be offensive, but what is that? I was like, it's a blackbird. So I'm just gonna leave that. It's a bird, and I'm not gonna paint that just yet.
I was going to ask you when the camera's turned off.
What it was?
What is that?
Yeah, it's a bird.
I see it now.
We're still just swirling away. And while I was painting this project and I, you know, was practicing my swirls, and then I got comfortable with them and I started painting this, it kind of is almost meditative. And I like that these represent the complexities of life and also how it just goes on, because I feel like it's an opportunity for us to slow down and just think through our life. It kind of gave me that same feeling of when we did our neurographic art project Just kind of thinking about something and making marks and maybe letting some things go. And for these smaller swirls, if you want to switch to like around 6 or around 2, feel free to. This is your painting and I want you to use whatever tools you feel comfortable using. So at this point, I'm now going to go to my step 3, if you haven't been doing it, which is kind of like darkening some areas. So some of my areas are still wet. I'm going to go ahead and just drop some color into there. Don't forget to do it in the swirl too, not just the trunks.
Listen, contrapposto just got me thinking about pasta. My tummy's a little growly.
Yeah, that actually sounds really good. That got a little bit dark, that's okay. If you ever got an area that's too dark, you can just blend it or just lift. It won't erase the color completely, but it won't be as harsh as it was. Now, because of Klimt's golden phase, that's where his most famous paintings are from. Like we talked about the Kiss, Tree of Life, the portrait of that lady.
Wait, hold please. It is...
I can never remember her name.
Adele.
Adele. I don't know why I thought it started with a J.
I mean, there's lots of portraits of dark-haired women.
Can I like see what you're
Judith in the head.
Wait, can I see it?
That one's Judith in the head.
Judith, that's the one. That's one I was talking about in the gold phase. So Chris, I'll send you a picture of Judith and the Kiss so you guys can see what I'm talking about. There are some paintings that he did. I mean, he was heavily inspired by other cultures. Japanese was one he was heavily inspired by, which Art Nouveau in itself is inspired by Japanese art. But you can see here there's some like funky shapes. And that can be towards like Egyptian art. So he took like these different references from historical places and periods and kind of incorporated them into the different designs and patterns that he did within his art. But there are paintings where he didn't use gold leaf, and actually one of them, and I was really debating between doing this painting, the Tree of Life, or he has these garden paintings that are green with like pops of like reds and blues and whites, and it's just like a garden. And I thought they were so beautiful. I loved them. But ultimately I decided to go for this one. But what I'm saying is he has other work outside of maybe what you have seen with the gold leaf that I think is very interesting and beautiful. So if you have a moment, take a look. And if you're feeling like it, I mean, I know you guys got paint and paper. Try one of his projects, another one, a different one than this. If you have gold leaf laying around, I'm just kidding. I don't even know how to, I know some artists who actually use gold leaf. It's a process that I've never actually done myself, but I hear it's pretty time consuming. I would like to try it.
I've seen just like random recommended YouTube videos of people like gold leafing a whole ceiling.
Really?
Yeah, you can buy the sheets of it on Amazon. I mean, it's not, you know, it's not cheap, but I think it's more affordable than you think to buy like a booklet of gold leaf sheets.
Well, I think I might have to try it. If you guys are interested in that, learning how to do that, let me know.
If any of you see Sarah standing next to a man who has been completely gold leafed all over his face, you'll know what happened.
Okay, I'm feeling pretty good about my lights and darks here. And again, it doesn't have to be on every swirl, it doesn't have to be on every piece, just like here and there. Okay. Well, that looks pretty darn good. Now we're gonna move to step 3. We're gonna do our ground. So if you can see, I was pretty loose with this. And he's trying to mimic the underground and the earth. So we have like flowers, we have dirt, we have all of these different things. And I wasn't too particular about making sure that all of the shapes were there, that I kind of just let it be a little bit loose and embrace the watercolor aspect of the medium that we're using. But this is your painting, so you can do whatever you feel comfortable with. I went ahead and just went a little bit more loose with my stuff. I'm adding a little bit of purple to my brown mixture just to get a slightly different brown than my tree. Maybe that's too brown, so I'm gonna grab more yellow. And you can paint around. I'm still using my 12 here. I'm gonna just paint around the shapes that I have. Still kind of, oh, I never actually painted this section, did I? That's okay, I'm doing it now.
That was on purpose.
And you can drop in water, other colors, to get just like variation in value and stuff like that. So if it's nice and wet, then I can just be like, here's some, here's some. The trickiest thing is trying to make this line up, so I gotta look over my painting for a second. That feels pretty good. Okay. And I'm gonna let that dry for a second before I do kind of like this section and my details, because if I try it, or my like flowers and stuff on top of this. Because if you try and do it when it's wet like this, it's just gonna all bleed together, and I wanna keep some of the color separate. So I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna do some of the like symbols that are within this tree. And it's so funny because when I was researching this, I was trying to figure out like what these little things are. Couldn't figure it out. Mushroom. They're like, well, there's actually, if you look, I couldn't get into a lot of detail here, but they're actually little eyeballs like on the bottom. And I was just like Googling, I'm like, specific symbols within Tree of Life. And I just like, I couldn't find anything. So if you guys do find something, let me know. But they're just little like mushroom eyeball guys. And then I also have these like, maybe they're snakes, but you see how they're like a cross with little triangles? Yeah. And I just kind of did it here and there. I didn't go off the painting exactly. I gave myself a little bit of creative freedom of placement and swirls and symbols and things like that. So if you're looking at an area and you're like, there's no way I can fit that little guy in there, put it somewhere else. Or don't put it in at all. It's your painting. Mushroom guy. Swirl.
I appreciate the noises. They make it better.
Swirl, mushroom guy. Those ones?
Yep.
Okay. And then if our tree is dry, we can mix all of our colors together to get a dark value. So you can see all my colors kind of puddled up in the bottom right here. That's fine. I'm just gonna pull from those. Worked out good. Now this is reading very, very purple, and that's because the colors here were purple and pink and blue, right? So that's gonna come across as purple. So I'm actually going to add some honey brown to my purple to tone down the purpleness. It's kind of reddish, let's add some blue, just to see. Let's just see what happens. There we go. Now see how it's kind of turning more of a gray? there, almost like a black. There we go.
I mean, you've said it before, and also a long time ago I filmed with another guest artist named Aaron, but he was talking about the different blacks that you can get when you mix your own black as opposed to using a bottled black.
Yes.
And I noticed that now because that black that you made is so rich.
Yes, so there are some, okay, so before I start talking, I'm gonna just start kind of going off my reference photo of the different shapes, and there are organic and geometric shapes, which means there are round and there are like triangles and all of this stuff. I took artistic liberty when looking at the painting and recreating my own, where I didn't copy everything, but just some of the stuff. Feel free to do the same. Maybe you don't even like those symbols and you're like, I'm not even gonna put those in there. You have every right to do that. So I'm just gonna kind of like go for it. As long as your tree is dry, you should be good to go. Yes, but when it comes to the color black, there are some artists and painters and teachers who really don't like using the color black itself because of, like, I feel like tube color black for the most part is like a lack of color.
Yeah.
And when you try and mix it with other colors, it actually grays the color down instead of just darkening it or what have you. So mixing black is a great way to still keep the richness and vibrancy of color while making it darker. And absolutely you can make choices of like, do I want a green black? Do I want a purple black? You can absolutely make those. I also have used black paint in my paintings. Like, I'm not one that is very much against it. It really just depends on how I'm feeling, what I have available, what I feel comfortable doing. And maybe you're like, I'm totally fine using the color black and I really don't think it makes that big of a difference.
I think black also might just be informed by the surroundings, because if you have an overall dark painting with lots of dark browns and dark purples, maybe you need that bottled black to provide the true black.
Yes, because, well, and another thing of why I hope not, but I can see why some people get frustrated with my color mixing, is colors are informed by what's around it. Colors will change depending on what color is next to it. And so when we're painting things and I say mix a dark value, that dark value could be a dark brown, it could be a dark black, it could be a dark purple, but it's gonna read as black next to what we already have. So I don't spend so much time on the individual colors itself in the specific recipes because I'm just trying to communicate a black. And if it's darker than everything that's around it, then people are gonna be like, okay, yeah, that's a black.
But like if you look at it close, it might just be dark brown.
Exactly.
Right.
Or it might be dark green, or it might be dark purple. But for students, for people that are learning, that can be really frustrating because you're just like, I'm trying to make black, but this is just brown, because our brain, when we think of the color black, we think of complete black, no light in it whatsoever. But that color doesn't actually totally exist, because there has to be light on anything. Like you have, in order to see it, there's got to be light there. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So look at a black object that you have in the light, and I want you to pay attention to, like a black dog. We've painted a black dog before, and that's really hard because our brain is telling us, well, this whole thing is black. It's a black dog. But it has form, and how the light hits it, it has highlights, and the highlights are going to be different colors depending on the color black of your dog and what is around it. So you can have a highlight of a blue or a highlight of a green or any of these other things. And you just have to like accept that there are other colors within this thing, and it's not, well, it's not as black and white as we might think.
Wow. Wow. Real good. This issue is not so black and white.
And if you're not a huge fan of these shapes, another thing that you can do if you still want to include them but not have them be as prominent is just do them in a lighter value, not use such a dark value. Kind of use a medium value on top so you get some of those marks, you get some of that texture, the hint of things here and there, but maybe it's not as stark.
Just know you're making Klimt cry, but you can go ahead, make them light.
So another interesting thing about Klimt is he was never married, but he fathered 14 children.
Holy cow.
I did not read what he was like as a father. I don't know that. I don't know if I want to know that. I mean, I don't know the man. But you know how there's sometimes where you're just like, maybe I don't read about that.
Yeah.
You know?
Let's leave that a mystery.
Let's just leave that alone. I don't need to know more than that. I'm fine knowing that.
14's a lot of kids, man.
He has never done a self-portrait.
Really?
Mm-hmm. He was like, why would I paint myself when there are women that I could paint? Like,
he
literally,
said that?
yeah. He's like, I'd much rather paint a woman.
Okay, all right.
And he did. I mean, his portraits are really beautiful.
Just the posturing in some, like, you know, obviously I think of The Kiss.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, the posturing of some of the people in it is unique. You can almost tell it's a Klimt painting from a distance. You know what I mean?
Oh, very unique. His
Yeah.
use of patterns, his use of symbolism, his use of mark making, his organic, funky shapes, but then his figures are sometimes really gaunt looking.
Yeah.
And it's just, I feel like the juxtaposition of all of those things is interesting. And where it's just like, I have this gold and I have these really pretty things and I have these flowers, but then I have like this skull with like, you know, and this person looks really, really skinny, you know, like it's interesting. And it's also interesting because I can look at his work and I can say, oh, that reminds me actually of this artist. And then they're like, this artist was inspired by it. I'm like, I can see that. Like, it's so cool.
I think for me, a trademark that I think of when I think of Klimt is busy.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like a lot of his paintings were very busy.
Yes.
You know, by design.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of details and everything.
Yeah. And again, it kind of, and maybe I just didn't do a very good job researching it, but I really thought that there would be reasons behind these shapes and symbols. And I really couldn't find any, but maybe I just didn't do as good of a job. So if you guys know, go ahead and comment. I would love to know. Because I find them unique.
Well, we talked about this in the Rembrandt episode, but I was talking about sometimes for me personally, when I make something that I like the most, it's because I haven't really thought about the choice and I just make the choice.
Mm-hmm.
This could be just an example of that. You're just painting and it's like, well, triangle, boom.
Yeah.
That, you know, there's a good chance there's meanings behind them, but
I mean,
could not.
And the art style itself, the art movement itself, it was detailed, it was about ornate, it was about patterns, it was about organic shapes. So it's not necessarily that maybe these things have to mean anything, but instead they inform what the style of art is. Okay, now I'm going to do some you can mix lemon yellow and your azure to get a green. And you can do your little green triangle things that I'm going to call snakes. Don't know though.
Tree of Life, snakes, it checks out.
It feels like it's connected, but. And I don't stress too much about how perfect this is.
So as a painter, Sarah.
Yeah.
How often do you think these people were painting? As much as you? More than you? Because you paint a lot.
I mean, it's hard to say, but when it's your profession, it's a job. It is every day.
Do you think most of these people's works have been lost? Do you think they just sat in a drawer and rotted somewhere? Or do you think most of them ended up in collectors' hands?
I think it's hard to say. I think it really just depends on the artist itself. And the interesting thing about artists is Like they could be making work for years and years and years and years, and then all of the sudden they're wanted. And so maybe they kept a good record of all of their work, and you know, people are then interested in buying and collecting their work. Or maybe they tossed them because at that time nobody cared. You know, like I think it really just depends. And different artists are different. But I would think that these artists that we're talking about, they make. I mean, especially we're going to talk about Yayao Kusama, and I'm reading her autobiography right now to get a little bit more insight that I can share with you. And she moved to New York and just spent all day painting, all day, every day, painting and creating and making. She only stopped to eat. She only stopped to sleep. So some artists are like that. And some, like Jeff Koons, who's more of a modern artist, he actually just like draws up designs and then has his like interns and his helpers actually make the art. He does the big, like if you think of the air balloon dog sculpture, that's Jeff Koons.
I feel like Thomas Kinkade did something like that, where like, I don't know, maybe I'm just making this up, but I feel like he got to a point where people were painting the paintings mostly. Yeah,
and actually I'm going to go ahead and start painting down here. I'm going to use a dark neutral, and then I'm going to drop in different colors and leave some spaces for blues and pinks. But I'm being pretty loose with this here, so just go for it. It actually was a problem. I mean, we've talked about Rembrandt. I didn't mention this, but he taught a lot of students, and how students learn is by mimicking their artist or their teacher. And so people are coming to find out that there are these paintings that they thought were painted by Rembrandt, but were actually Rembrandt students. It actually happened a lot with female artists too, where their male teachers or counterparts actually got a lot of credit for the work that they created. One, because they were a student, and two, because they were female. And so it's, I think that's part of it, where once you start teaching it, always then you're going to find people that can create in a similar style and fashion as you do, which then, you know, if you create collectible paintings, can then be a little bit tricky of like, well, wait a second, who actually painted this and whose is this? And but a lot of those, like that happened more a long time ago than now, I think. Okay, so I'm going to do some pinks here. So I just squirted some fresh fuchsia onto my palette. And these are kind of like flowers. You can do, I'm going to do some fresh violet, some fresh blue, and some green. And I'm just going to kind of like paint around it, but it's going to get a little bit messy, and that's okay. You can kind of just let it go. And you're free to actually look up this painting or his other works to get a better feel for how we did kind of like earth and flowers and that kind of stuff. I'm using my round 6, but you can use whatever you feel comfortable using. And these things were almost like bluebells, or like that kind of curved bell shape over here.
I think I keep bringing it up because I'm so fascinated by the idea that the famous artists you know were so prolific, and you only know a couple of their things. And again, we stumbled into this Picasso room in a museum we went to, and there was so much work that I wouldn't even recognize as his, because you think of the typical Picasso style, but that was just one of his things he branched into. He has an entire lifetime of work of just like this other stuff.
Well, and that's what I find really fascinating about artists in general, and I think why sometimes when we're new to something, we're hung up on the wrong things. I can't tell you how many times, and I'm not saying this wrong as if it's bad, because I did the same thing, but sometimes we don't feel like we're a legitimate artist until we have our own style. But style changes, and if you look at the work history of all of these artists that we know, their style completely shifts and changes as they create, because we're always trying to pivot and learn and try something new and discover. And so like while we know some artists and they might have developed their own style that was actually new to the art world, which is probably why we know of them, like Picasso or Van Gogh, where it's just like they actually created a movement by creating this style. That's not always how they painted. And it actually shifts and changes, sometimes extremely, sometimes subtly within their art career. And so the best thing that you can do is to just start painting and to just make, and then try something new, and then just embrace the fact that it will constantly change and it will always shift. But it's for the pursuit of growing as an artist, the pursuit of going after what your curiosity. Let your curiosity guide your creativity, and you can discover some really interesting things. And that's what we see when we look at the work history of these artists, where it's just like, I mean, if you look at Picasso's early stuff, he was extremely talented at doing realistic renderings of people. That is not what he is known for historically, but he could do that. But he grew into that, and he shifted and he changed it. And
that room was really cool, that Picasso room, because there was a lot of work in it, and it was really well documented, and you saw his very early stuff, which was like photorealistic paintings of people.
Yeah.
And then there was one painting, and it was a man on a horse, and Picasso wanted to show the front side of the man and kind of his back at the same time, and it was like the spark of what you think of Picasso, and it's cool that you can kind of see it in that one painting.
Yes. You can almost, if you look, you can see the evolution happen little step by step. And so I always hope that as we pursue and learn, and I offer myself this same grace as I offer you, which is, don't trap yourself into thinking that you're not a legitimate artist until you find a style, or two, that once you discover a style, it's that and you're trapped in it and you can only do that. That is so limiting to who we are. And that's just not the human way in general. So it's so exciting. I would say that for me, do I think that I have found my own style? Yes. But have I also seen a shift in that style over the last couple of years, like with flowers or landscapes? Absolutely. And I'm not painting myself into a corner of what it is that I can and can't create. I'm not imposing these rules on myself. It's more just like really letting curiosity guide the entire experience.
Like landing on a style should not be the end goal for you.
And I don't want to diminish the accomplishment that you feel. It feels really good to be like, yes, this is me. I'm here, you know? But it's not the end. It's not the end, and it's not the only way. And just because you find that doesn't mean that your work is done. A lot of the artists keep going and change things up because they get too comfortable with what it is that they're creating, and they recognize that. Because then it kind of loses their interests. And so, I mean, I can't remember who it was, but I remember an artist saying, well, I stopped painting because I just got way too comfortable with it, and I really needed to get outside my zone. And so I started doing sculpture or something else, and it led to this, which led to that. And it's just a journey. It's the experience of creating and allowing yourself to have different experiences. Okay, I'm gonna add some green leaves around these flowers, little pink flowers.
I started gabbing, and then I looked back, and the tree's done. I'm sorry, I'm so chatty.
I love it. I love talking to you. That's probably why we're married.
Well, that works out. That worked out nice.
That worked out nicely for us. Okay. And again, this is if you look at the actual painting, it's more detailed than this. There's more symbols and marks and colors. So take what you will. Feel free to make it your own.
They do. I'm looking at the real one right now. They're like hamburger eye mushrooms.
They are, aren't they?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know why. I mean, that's the one that they said Egyptian references to, but...
Oh, I could see that. They got that Egyptian eye shape.
Yeah. Okay. So we did our ground, and we're going to do our bird. So I'm going to mix a dark value, which is essentially all my colors together, to try and get a color that's going to read as black on my painting. So I have this dark purple. I'm going to mix together honey brown and some blue, and I think I'll get a good dark color.
Here's a good question.
Okay.
The art gods come to you and say, Sarah Cray, you can have one painting of your choice in your hand. Any painting, like Mona Lisa, doesn't matter. What painting is it?
That's a horrible question. I gotta think about it. I mean, my gut reaction is Monet, one of the lilies, but that goes across the entire, because I can't tell you, going in to that museum in France and being in this huge room, this huge oval room, where the entire wall is a painting, like a framed painting.
It was stunning.
He built these huge frames. Like, I don't even know how to go about starting something like that. And to be surrounded by these expressive brushstrokes and these colors, and it takes up the whole wall in this white, everything else is white in that room. Maybe not the benches, I can't remember.
They were white.
And just walking along and knowing that I could spend literally hours looking at one painting. It was just this feeling that was so strong that I didn't expect. That I would probably choose one of those, but I would need to get a bigger house.
That's what I was going to say. I like how you did the 2-for-1 by picking the big painting so we would move out of our tiny house.
Yeah, there's no way that could fit in our house. Okay, so I'm going to do the bird, the black bird. So I mixed a really dark value. You can use a 2 or a 6 to fill this in. And like the white sections, I basically just painted around those. Now, in paintings, historically, blackbirds symbolize death. And there's actually a phrase that comes to mind that I learned in art history when I see this and I paint this, and it's called memento mori, and that's Latin for remember that we all must die. And it's kind of a more accurate symbolism of, or example of memento mori in paintings is like when you see like skulls, you know, like anything that reminds us of death is kind of that. And it's actually one of my favorite phrases because it's not talking about death in a way of it's good or bad. It's talking about that it's inevitable, which is true. And I actually, around this time last year, my bonus dad unexpectedly passed away, which was really hard. And I got a bracelet engraved with that phrase, memento mori, after he passed, because I realized that I was living my life in a way where I had this like unspoken agreement with the universe that I know that people die, but they'll only die when they're old and ready to die, and that's it. And to be confronted with the fact that that's not true, and not even recognizing that I was living under this unspoken agreement with the universe. It was just like this reality of we all must die at some point in some way. And it was just this way that I can remember that we have this one life to do the things that we want to do. There's, you know, like this is it. And you can take that, and that could be really scary, and it is scary. Or you could take that and say, well, what do I want to do within this life? And what is it that I want to experience? And is what I'm worrying about today really going to matter? It's kind of keeping that perspective of memento mori. Because if there's one thing about, my husband and I, Michael, were just talking about this recently, of if there's one thing I really loved about my bonus dad, is that he loved life. I mean, he loved eating great food, and he loved experiences, and he traveled all over the world, and you could tell that he had this love for just experiencing something. He went cave exploring and motorcycle riding and dove out of planes and did the craziest things and had the craziest stories because, I don't know, he didn't live a passive life. He was very active in experiencing it. And I think that's such a gift that we can have. And so when I saw this bird, I thought of that phrase, which reminded me of my dad, and just a reminder to you. That got a little heavier than I was anticipating, but that's okay. Art can do that, and there's nothing wrong with that.
There's something to this art stuff.
There's something to this art stuff. Okay, now at this point, I am going to kind of step back, take a look at my painting. I feel pretty good about it.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
It's a little bit, I mean, there are some parts that are slightly different, but that's the beauty of painting. That's the beauty of your own hands and mixing your own colors and you creating this. So I'm gonna call this good, but you guys feel free if you don't feel like it's done to keep going, or maybe you do. Maybe you felt like it was done before we added all the little symbols on the tree, and that's good too. I really appreciate you guys painting with me. I know that it is really hard to sit down and make time to create, so I just want to commend you on prioritizing not only you, but your creativity and your creative practice, and allowing yourself to bring that joy into your life. We have to do it with intention because so much of our time is being demanded of us. So I really appreciate that you guys not only chose to do it, but you chose to do it with us. If you want to share your work, I would love to see it. You can tag us on Instagram at Let's Go Make Art or hashtag Let's Make Art. If you're on Facebook, you can join our Facebook group. It's large, but it's encouraging, and you can learn so much from each other. That's called Let's Make Art Watercolor. And if you need any of these supplies, or if you want to paint this yourself, you can find kits and all of the stuff that you need at letsmakeart.com. So, Michael, thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
Thank you guys for being here, and I'll see you next time. Bye.